This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. Today we are talking about a bit of a heavier topic. We're talking about the death of Chris Farley, and just as a listener and viewer discretion, we will be talking about some pretty heavy stuff, death, drugs, alcohol, relationships,
so
things like that. So
kids in the car, maybe turn it off and listen to it on your headphones.
Yeah. And there is a reason that we want to have this conversation. And it was brought up in a conversation that, Mark, you and I had with another individual recently.
Our chief operating officer.
About some context to the story of how Chris Farley died. But so to preface that, would you mind sharing just a little bit about who Chris Farley was for somebody who may not be familiar or needs reminding?
And go watch the movies like Tommy Boy and all his SNL skits. YouTube him. I mean, he was a very brilliant comedian who always struggled with his weight, and I think covered that with his funny. But was not just a funny guy, but he used his body in very physical comedy as well.
Yeah,
I think, which made him stand out and was different in the time. I mean, he died in '97, so it's been a long time.
Well, and he talked pretty often, especially near the end of his life. He struggled with anxiety and depression for most of his life. Drug addiction,
alcoholism.
And one of the phrases that, if you remember the story cycle, part of his story cycle was that he was just the fat guy falling down shtick.
Right.
And so it was definitely something that he leaned into, and like some other comedians, he talked about how he sometimes had trouble telling whether the audience was laughing with him or at him.
Well, same thing with, look at John Belushi and Robin Williams, and he's still alive today, but even Jim Carrey and others where...
Yeah, Jim's been really, really transparent with the struggle that he's had being famous and being famous for being funny.
Right, because you think about if you're the funny guy, you're the guy that's always looked to in the room for entertainment, for relief, for making people feel better, but nobody pays attention to you. And I think that was the big thing with Chris Farley. And I think part of the reason we wanted to talk about this today is it kind of goes back to this conversation about being seen, being valued, being known.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of so I'm going to set up the scene, and just to let you know that there's not very much information that I could back up factually about Chris Farley's death. A lot of what I've heard has been rumor story, but I'm pulling from the common story that most articles, most research, I guess, agrees on. These were the circumstances around his death and leading up to it.
And if not, I mean, if somehow we get some of the facts wrong, look at this more of a story, allegory, allegorical conversation today, and you'll see why in a minute.
Yeah. And this does speak to a small aside that whatever you're listening to from any source, you should be kind of seeing if that's correct, right. Not just in the way that you view the world, but factually as well.
Even us, right? Fact check us. If we mess up, email us. It's something we want to make sure that we are on point.
Yeah. So all that said, this is not as accurate as I wish that I could make it, because I wish that I could pull from a credible source and say this is the way it is, but I have done my best.
I have too,
to find out as much factual evidence for these circumstances as I can. But near the end of his life, he was struggling deeply with drug addiction, had been in 17 different rehab centers within that year, and was really struggling in a lot of aspects of his life.
Yes, and at the end of his life, he was finishing up a movie called Almost Heroes with Matthew Perry from Friends. And I remember, I think late in the 2000s, early 2000s, I was watching that movie, and it was pretty funny, but you could tell, he died halfway or towards the end of it and that kind of stuff, and they had to kind of patchwork a way around it. But as they were interviewing some of the members of that, staff of the movie, staff, and then also other actors, they're like, well, he was a little bit off, but we didn't know what was going on, and wish we'd have known something and done something, because it was not an intentional overdose; it was an accidental overdose. Right. It was he died from a concoction that John Belushi died from called a speedball.
And what happened, and this is really sad, is that, and this is a little bit graphic, but he didn't die from the overdose. He died of asphyxiation on his own vomit, and. He was alone at the time, which we'll get to in just a minute. But it is sad to think about an individual human being who is struggling so emotionally and physically in this moment of death, totally alone. Mm-hmm. The reason he was alone, he wasn't alone the entire time. He had hired a call girl to come to his home. I think it was an apartment, though.
It was in Chicago.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And so he had hired this call girl, and this is
how the story has it, right?
Yeah, this is how the story has it. The rest has been pretty easy to identify and to back up factually, but the story has it that the call girl arrives, and Chris Farley is less interested in anything sexual than he is in cocaine and just wanting to talk, and that he asks this call girl just to talk with him.
Just stay
be present in the room with him so he's not alone. And she felt uncomfortable with that and left. And soon after, he passed away. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that we talk about this story is because I think it has a lot of meaning to our own lives and to the way that we see the world around us, that this individual who gave so many people so much joy was struggling so deeply. And in the darkest hour, he was looking for somebody to just talk to, just to be present with. And that is not something that only a counselor can do. And it's something that we can all do for each other and just be present for others.
I think it's something that when we talk about this and our listeners, and I'm thinking here going, well, yeah, duh, we can be here for people.
Yeah.
But putting it into practice can be difficult.
And uncomfortable.
I
think it's really easy to jump on the wagon of accusing the call girl of, well, couldn't you see this? Couldn't you see that? And we have to keep in mind, he was doing a lot of cocaine. He was definitely not himself in that moment. And that even in a sober situation with people that we know, being present in the midst of pain and listening to somebody who is in pain can be uncomfortable for anyone.
It's such an existential topic almost of what it looks like to just be present with people. And I talk about this all the time. I know you do. I know we do as counselors. I know some of our heroes do, like Irvin Yalom and others. Mm-hmm. Just, it's nothing wrong with having a paid friend. And the call girl is not the way to do it. It's it could be a clergy. It could be, somebody from a faith group. It could be a counselor. But I think as I've thought about Chris's story and I thought, about our time today, just the depth of my soul just like aches for people that are going through that. That's part of the reason we're counselors. Mm-hmm. But, we're unashamedly saying this is everybody's responsibility. Would you say responsibility? Would you say opportunity? Maybe
opportunity. And I think it's a bigger opportunity than we think, because it's we talk about this a lot. We've said what I'm about to say a lot of times, but I want to continue saying it until it gets through, that people struggle in invisible ways. And you can't tell what's going on inside unless you're present and asking questions.
Right.
And so we've had a lot of suicides in Colorado, period. And that a lot of them are afterwards people saying, I would have never thought this person was so charismatic. They were so encouraging. They were so funny. They were so this, and this, the things that we don't anticipate being a part of suicidality or emotional and mental struggle. And I think it speaks to something that we need to be constantly reminded of, that unless we know the person in a intimate way, and that doesn't mean just in a marriage or anything like that. It just means being able to ask the hard questions and say, how are you really doing, and be vulnerable and have a space that allows for vulnerability. We can't just assume that somebody isn't struggling because of how they present themselves.
Right. Oh, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to probably get some pushback, but in my opinion, every suicide is preventable. Right? Now, there are some people that we've worked with that are just so determined to die by suicide or to take their life that, you can work really hard to prevent that. But if their mind's made up, their mind's made up. But when I say every suicide is preventable, I'm meaning that we have an opportunity to really step in and lean into people's lives in a way that we don't. And this is, again, in a lot of ways, is a very Western Americanized thing, which really frustrates me of I'm going to bear my own burden. I'm going to keep it to myself. Your problem's your problem. It's not my problem. Where did we come up with that? I think it just kind of crept into our verbiage and our mindsets over the last 5 or 6 decades.
Yeah. And I'd encourage you to go watch the video that Mayfield Counseling produced called A Conversation on Community. And it talks about how important community is in the midst of struggle. And I think oftentimes what we see is that in drug addiction and in struggle and self-harm and suicidality, all of these struggles that are kind of sensational in our conversations, they thrive on isolation. And one of the best things that we can do for ourselves, period, and one of the best things that we can do for the people around us is to draw into community. And what I mean by community is not that I have 1,400 friends on Facebook and they like all the things that I post. And it's not even I go to church and people know my name. It is having people in your life that are encouraging you, that you allow to enter into your space and have meaningful conversations that are hard and uncomfortable at times, but important nonetheless to be known. We go back to our series about the core longings. Right. We want to be known. We want to be understood and accepted, and that doesn't happen unless we open ourselves up to other people. Well,
and I know we're all we have our lives, and our lives can get chaotic sometimes, and those kinds of things. But I think a good example is, over the last year. Our lives have been, your life, my life has been pretty chaotic and for different reasons. But we know each other well enough that, we walk into a room and you're like, something's off. Yeah. What's going on? How you doing? And it's that scene piece. It might not be a very long conversation, but it's like, okay.
Well, and to be candid with our audience too, there are times that we will be in a room, and I don't know about you, but I will experience a distance in our relationship where I know, something doesn't feel exactly right in the way that we're interacting with each other. It seems off. And I what I'm admitting to is that I don't often engage that conversation. I don't often say, hey, Mark, it feels a little bit distant between us.
Are we okay?
Are we okay? Hey, how are you doing? And so we're not saying this as experts. We're saying this as people.
Right. We're learning. But I think that's the opportunity, right? The opportunity is when we pay attention to it and then step into it. And usually it's not a big conversation. Yeah. It's like, no, I didn't sleep last night, and or yeah, you did something last week that really upset me. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Yeah. But it's not like it's the isolation piece of it, letting it foster and grow. Right. And I think with a lot of individuals like Chris Farley, he probably felt like he had to be the one that was always on. Yeah. And to make everybody else happy, but had nobody speak into his life from a hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Or people that he did have maybe in his life that could do that, didn't know how to, or like you were just saying, noticed it but didn't step into it.
Yeah. Oftentimes cost gets in the way of us being able to pursue help.
Or perceived cost. Or perceived cost,
value. And we don't want that to be the case. I don't think that should be the reason that somebody is in isolation, is just because they couldn't afford a support that was available. And so my encouragement with that is, if you are in a situation, or you know somebody in a situation who feels stuck financially to be able to pursue the help that they need, please give Mayfield Counseling Centers a call. We may not be able to provide the service that you're looking for, but we want to be able to provide you the ability to seek that out and to find the opportunities that are available to you.
Right.
And Mayfield Counseling Centers is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that we often try to elicit donations from the community so that we can offer services to individuals who can't afford that support.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I also think too, if you've got people, if you're listening going, that's me, I need to find some support, I would ask you just to take stock, not in a shameful or guilt producing way, but take stock of what you value. You buy what you value. Mm-hmm. And again, it's no shame or guilt there. It's just seeing what it is, right? Yeah. And so I've worked with people in the past that say, I can't afford counseling, but they're driving up in a Mercedes.
Yeah.
Fine. You tell me what you value right now. Again, I'm not going to judge that.
Well, and I think we can look at drug addicts. If we have a homeless drug addict who has no assets whatsoever, they're still able to somehow afford the drugs.
Right.
And I think and that's not in any condemning way at all. I think it just speaks to when we seek out something honestly and truly, we're able to make it happen one way or another, whether that's borrowing from friends or doing things.
Or not going out to eat every night or Starbucks on the way in, or, and so I think it's that, one, recognizing what is, but also recognizing, what do we value?
Yeah.
And counseling is typically, at least in Colorado, $90 to $120, depending on who you go see.
Yep.
So I think it's something that, and it's not this lifelong, people look at counseling sometimes as this lifelong quote unquote sentence.
Yeah.
It's not. It can be a way for ongoing health and well-being, but typically it's 6 to 20 sessions that you need for that. So is that an investment of round figures $6,000 to $2,000 over the course of a year?
Yep.
I wonder how much of that is spent, on Starbucks or out to eat.
Well, and we didn't intend for this to be a donation conversation. Yeah. However, I think it's important that we have a little bit of that conversation here today, that if you are in a place where you feel healthy and confident in yourself, but you see people who aren't putting the same value on their mental and emotional health and aren't pursuing the support that they need because of financial reasons, you have the opportunity to step into the gap a little bit and to provide them a way to engage in the counseling that they may not know how beneficial it can be. And so that's why they don't have as much value in it, where $100 means a whole bunch of other things that are worth more than that counseling session. But you may know how beneficial that hour can be. I would just encourage you to reach out and talk to us about how you may be able to support the scholarship fund that we have here that allows individuals who don't have the means or who are struggling to find those means to find the support that they need. Yeah, I agree. And even in your own community, if you're listening that's not in Colorado, what that looks like for supporting the mental health awareness, I think, piece is the biggest thing, right? Which can start with self-disclosure. Sure. That's a huge part. Whenever you're able to say in a conversation, I was talking to my counselor the other day and they brought up this. That normalizes the experience. And we're still fighting to normalize the fact that you can reach out for help at a counselor, which sounds a little bit crazy, that we still struggle to acknowledge the benefits of mental health care. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we wanted to use the story of Chris Farley, whether it be 100% true or partially true, to go, we shouldn't let
people that are around us get to that point, you know, and it's not our responsibility to fix them. It's not our responsibility to drag their
We aren't
butts
responsible for anyone who dies by suicide.
Right. You know, but is there things that we can do to help? Obviously, there are more things we can do to help, but what does it look like to get involved in your local chapter of NAMI? What does it look like to get involved in your local chapter of AA or, Alcoholics Anonymous or NA, Narcotics Anonymous, or Celebrate Recovery or Grief Share or Divorce Care or, whatever, fill in the blank of what's available in your area. But what does it look like to get involved in those kind of things? What does it look like to get involved in your local chapter of, a counseling association, if you're a counselor or if you're listening, I believe as counselors, we shouldn't just be sitting in the room with people hearing their problems and not doing anything in public.
Yeah. And if you want to help, whether it's financial or not, whether it's involvement or not, whether it's whatever it is, if you have a desire to be involved in the conversation around mental health, you can email us, candid@mayfieldcounseling.com. We can send you a list of those resources that we just listed off, ways that you can support your community and engage in the conversation about mental and emotional health being important.
And if you just want to do something really low threshold, share kind of conversations with somebody too.
Yeah.
Somebody that's maybe not listened to before. Say, hey, this is a great podcast, and you don't need to go through from beginning to now. Although we would recommend
the beginning's
it.
not.
We've
gotten better.
We've got. I got better. But it's a good resource too, just to begin to go. Hey, maybe you don't want to go to a counselor, but listen to these guys talk about mental health for a little while, and then go from there.
Which is a normal thing. People share podcasts all the time.
Yep.
We're grateful for when you share our podcast. Because it helps us to be able to have, or at least to elicit some of these conversations with more individuals.
Yep. Well, thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions, let us know.
Yep. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.